You think you know the law better than me? Officer Derek Vaughn asked, his voice carrying across the hotel driveway as two guests near the entrance slowed just enough to notice. Malcolm Hayes stood beside a dark sedan under the pale glow of the parking structure lights, his hands visible, his posture relaxed, his expression almost unreadable. He had already provided identification. He had already explained that he was leaving a legal conference inside the hotel. He had already answered the questions Derek claimed were necessary. Still, the officer kept pushing. "No, Officer Vaughn," Malcolm said quietly. "I do not think that." Derek gave him a skeptical look. "Could have fooled me." Malcolm held his gaze for a moment. Then the faintest smile appeared. "I will see you in court." Derek laughed once, short and dismissive, as if the sentence confirmed everything he believed about the man standing in front of him. To Derek, it sounded like another empty threat from someone trying to look important. He had no idea Malcolm had spent years inside courtrooms where rank, reputation, confidence, and ego became meaningless the moment evidence entered the record. He did not know the black man standing beneath those garage lights was Colonel Malcolm Hayes, a senior military judge who had presided over cases involving command authority, due process, misconduct, and careers that could change with a single ruling. More importantly, Malcolm had no intention of telling him. Not yet. If Derek's judgment was fair, Malcolm's title should not matter. If it was not, the title should not be the only reason the facts suddenly became important. Derek folded his arms. "You can smile all you want. Right now, you are being detained." Malcolm's expression settled again. "Then I want the basis stated clearly. Suspicious activity." "What activity?" Derek's jaw tightened. "We had a report about someone checking parked vehicles." Malcolm glanced toward his own sedan. "And what specifically connects me to that report?" "You match the description." "Which part?" Derek stepped closer. "Do not turn this into an argument." Malcolm remained still. "I am asking you to explain the decision." The small indicator light on Derek's body camera remained on. Above them, a hotel security camera covered the entrance and part of the driveway. Near the valet stand, Ethan Miller, the hotel security manager, had stopped reviewing a clipboard and was watching the exchange. Malcolm noticed all three. Derek seemed to notice only Malcolm. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he said. Malcolm glanced down. "They already are." Derek's expression hardened. "You always this difficult?" Malcolm paused. "Only when clarity matters." A guest near the entrance raised a telephone and began recording. Derek saw it and looked irritated. Malcolm did not. His attention stayed on the officer in front of him. Time, words, sequence, witnesses. He stored each detail automatically. Derek pointed toward Malcolm's briefcase on the trunk. "Open that." Malcolm looked at him carefully. "Are you asking for consent to search it?" "I am asking you to cooperate." "That is not the same question." Silence stretched across the driveway. Derek shook his head. "You can explain all of this to a judge." Malcolm's faint smile returned. "That is exactly what I intend to do." Derek had heard the sentence as arrogance. Malcolm meant something much simpler. Court was not where he planned to use his rank against anyone. It was where assumptions would finally have to sit beside facts, and where confidence would have to answer one question it could not talk its way around. "What can you prove?" SUA 90 minutes earlier, Malcolm Hayes had been standing beneath the warm lights of a conference hall, answering a question from a young Army captain who had stayed behind after the final session. Most of the room was already empty. Officers gathered folders, closed laptops, and exchanged quiet conversations near the doors while hotel staff began resetting chairs. Malcolm wore a dark civilian suit instead of a uniform, and nothing about his appearance announced rank. The captain held a notebook against his chest. "Sir, when does authority become dangerous?" Malcolm considered the question before answering. "When the person holding it stops asking whether the decision is justified and starts assuming the position itself is justification." The captain nodded slowly. Malcolm continued. "Procedure does not weaken authority. It proves that authority deserves to be trusted." It was not a line created for a speech. Malcolm had spent decades believing it. He had seen disciplined leaders make difficult decisions without losing respect for rules, and he had seen confident people become careless the moment nobody challenged them. Major Allison Reed approached from the side aisle carrying a leather portfolio. "Colonel, your materials are packed." Malcolm thanked the captain, then turned toward her. "I appreciate it." Allison glanced toward the doors. "Your driver can bring the car around." Malcolm shook his head. I will walk to the garage. She smiled. You know, most people with your schedule would accept the help. Most people with my schedule should walk more. Allison laughed softly, still determined to look like the least important person in every room. Malcolm picked up his briefcase. Sometimes you learn more that way. Malcolm removed his driver's license slowly and held it where Derek could see it. Derek took the card, glanced at the name, then looked toward the sedan. This vehicle registered to you? Malcolm nodded. Yes. Derek studied the license again. What are you doing near the garage? Malcolm glanced toward the hotel entrance. I just left a legal conference inside. I am heading home. Derek's eyes narrowed slightly. What kind of legal conference? Military justice. The answer should have reduced the uncertainty. Instead, it seemed to create a new line of suspicion. You military? Derek asked. Yes. Active duty? Malcolm paused. Officer Vaughn. Before we continue, what exactly was reported? Derek shifted his weight. We received a call about a man checking parked vehicles around this structure. What description did the caller provide? Derek looked at him for a moment. Male. Dark clothing. Carrying a bag. Malcolm glanced across the driveway. Two men, leaving the same conference, wore dark suits. One carried a laptop case. Another had a briefcase almost identical to his. Race? Malcolm asked. Derek hesitated. Was not specified. Height? Around 6 feet. Malcolm stood just under 6 feet. Age? Nothing specific. Any description of the vehicle the person was standing near? Derek's expression tightened. You ask a lot of questions. Malcolm slipped his license back into his wallet. I am trying to understand what connects me to the report. Derek folded his arms. Maybe let me conduct the investigation. Malcolm nodded once. Then investigate. The words were calm, but Derek heard challenge in them. The small indicator on Derek's body camera was illuminated. Malcolm noticed it immediately. Above the hotel entrance, another security camera covered part of the driveway. Near the valet station, Ethan Miller, the hotel security manager, had stopped reviewing paperwork and was watching. Malcolm stored each detail without turning his head. Derek pointed toward the sedan. You said this is your car. Correct. And that briefcase belongs to you. Yes. Open it. Malcolm looked at him carefully. Are you asking for permission to search it? Derek's jaw shifted. I am asking you to cooperate. Those are different things. The evening noise seemed to fade around them. A car rolled slowly past the entrance. Dry leaves moved across the pavement in the wind. Derek stepped closer. You trying to make this harder than it needs to be? Malcolm's voice remained even. No. I am trying to make the record clear. Derek gave a short laugh. What record? Malcolm glanced briefly at the body camera. Derek followed his eyes and seemed to understand the answer. Keep your hands visible. Malcolm looked down at his hands. They are visible. Do not get smart. Malcolm said nothing. Derek reached for his radio and requested a vehicle registration check. While he waited, he looked back at Malcolm. What exactly do you do in the military? Legal work. Lawyer. Malcolm allowed a slight pause. Something like that. Derek shook his head. That explains the attitude. Malcolm almost smiled. No, officer. It explains the vocabulary. The radio crackled. Dispatch confirmed the sedan was registered to Malcolm Hayes at the same address listed on his license. Nothing else concerning appeared in the check. Derek heard it. Clearly. So did Malcolm. A simple encounter now had an obvious exit. Derek could verify the conference attendance, compare the caller's description, and move on. Malcolm waited. Derek looked at the sedan, then at the briefcase, then back at him. We are not finished. Malcolm checked his watch. 6:39 p.m. Then please tell me what fact keeps this detention going. Derek's face hardened. That was the moment Malcolm realized the stop was no longer being guided only by the original call. Something else had entered the decision. Pride. And pride, unlike evidence, rarely knew when to stop. Malcolm held Derek's gaze after asking what fact still justified the detention. For several seconds, neither man spoke. The hotel driveway continued moving around them as if nothing unusual was happening. A sedan pulled toward the valet stand. A couple crossed the lobby entrance. Somewhere above the garage, an elevator bell sounded. Yet inside the small space between Malcolm and Derek, the encounter had narrowed to one question the officer did not seem ready to answer. You match the description, Derek said finally. Malcolm nodded once. The description was a man in dark clothing carrying a bag. He glanced toward the hotel entrance. There are several men here who match that. Derek's expression tightened. You are the one I am talking to. That is true. Malcolm's voice stayed measured. It does not explain why. Ethan Miller, the hotel security manager, stepped away from the valet station and approached carefully. Officer Vaughn, if this concerns someone checking vehicles, our cameras cover the garage entrance and the front drive. I can pull the footage now. Derek turned toward him. I will ask if I need it. Ethan stopped. It could clear up what happened in a few minutes. I said I have it handled. Malcolm noticed the exchange without reacting. Another independent source had been offered. Another opportunity to verify. Derek let it pass. Mr. Hayes, stay where you are. Malcolm looked down the driveway, then back at him. Am I being formally detained? Yes. For investigative purposes? Yes. Then please state the specific conduct you believe supports that. Detention. Derek's frustration became visible now. You keep trying to control this. Malcolm shook his head. No. I am trying to understand it. A guest near the lobby doors raised a telephone and began recording. Derek noticed the screen and glanced toward it. Malcolm noticed something else. The body camera was still running. Ethan was still present. Hotel security footage was still available. The sequence was being preserved from several angles. Derek pointed toward Malcolm's briefcase again. Open the case. Malcolm looked at him. Do you have a warrant? I do not need a warrant to ask. Correct. Malcolm paused. And I do not have to consent simply because you asked. Derek stepped closer, stopping several feet away. You really enjoy pushing this. Malcolm's face remained calm. I enjoy clear boundaries. The response seemed to irritate Derek more than open defiance would have. He reached for his radio again and asked dispatch whether the original caller had provided additional details. The answer came back after a short delay. No additional clothing description. No race. No confirmed vehicle. No report of forced entry. Malcolm heard every word. Derek did too. Ethan looked toward him, waiting. For a moment, Malcolm believed the officer might finally end the stop. Then Derek lowered the radio. We are still sorting this out. Malcolm checked his watch. 6:44 p.m. What new information are you sorting? Derek's jaw tightened. You can stop with the legal questions. They are not legal questions. Malcolm looked directly at him. They are factual questions. The guest with the telephone shifted position to keep both men in frame. Ethan remained beside the valet station, ready to provide footage. Derek's own records check had already confirmed Malcolm's identity and vehicle. The dispatch update had added nothing. The path out of the encounter was becoming wider with every passing minute, yet Derek kept walking away from it. You think all this is going to matter later? Derek asked. Malcolm looked briefly at the cameras surrounding them. Yes. Derek gave a dismissive smile. Then you can explain it to a judge. Malcolm's expression softened almost. Imperceptibly, he had heard the words before, in courtrooms, hearings, and arguments where confidence often arrived long before proof. That is exactly where facts belong, he said. Derek mistook the calmness for arrogance. Malcolm understood it as discipline. By then, the original call had become almost secondary. The real question was no longer why Derek had stopped him. It was why, after every available fact pointed toward ending the detention, Derek still refused to let it end. At 6:48 p.m., Derek Vaughn finally wrote the words investigative detention into his notebook, but the moment he did, Malcolm Hayes understood something important. The stop now had a name, and names created records. For the record, Malcolm said, you have confirmed my identity, confirmed the vehicle belongs to me, received no additional description from dispatch, and declined the hotel's offer to review security footage. Derek looked up sharply. You do not get to dictate my report. Malcolm's expression remained calm. I'm not dictating it. I am stating what happened. Ethan Miller stood near the valet station, still waiting to provide access to the cameras. The guest near the lobby doors continued recording. Derek glanced toward both of them, then back at Malcolm. You really think this is going to help you? Malcolm answered without hesitation. I think an accurate record helps everyone. Derek closed the notebook. You military lawyers always talk like every conversation is a hearing. Malcolm almost smiled. Not every conversation. Only the ones where facts keep changing and authority refuses to notice. The words landed harder than Malcolm intended, or perhaps exactly as hard as the situation required. Derek stepped closer, his voice lower now. You think you know the law better than me? Malcolm held his gaze. No, Officer Vaughn. I think the law applies to both of us. Derek let out a short, humorless laugh. Fine. You want to argue about it? You can tell it to the judge. There it was. The sentence Derek believed would end the exchange. Malcolm looked at him for a long second. Then the tension in his face softened into the faintest smile. That is exactly what I plan to do. Derek frowned. What is that supposed to mean? Malcolm's voice stayed quiet. It means I will see you in court. The guest with the telephone shifted closer. Ethan looked from Malcolm to Derek. The body camera continued recording every word. Derek shook his head. You think that is a threat? No, Malcolm's answer came immediately. It is not meant to be. That seemed to bother Derek more. A threat could be dismissed. A calm statement could not. Derek reopened his notebook and wrote for several seconds. I am documenting that you remained argumentative throughout the detention. Malcolm looked at him. Then please document the questions I asked. Derek stopped writing. You do not know when to let something go. Malcolm checked his watch. 6:51 p.m. I know exactly when to let something go. When the facts support it. Ethan stepped forward again. Officer, the footage is ready if you want it. Security pulled the relevant camera already. Derek glanced toward him. Another exit. Another chance to verify the caller's report against what actually happened. I will request it later if necessary. Ethan nodded slowly but did not move away. Malcolm watched Derek return his attention to the notebook. The detention had lasted long enough that the original uncertainty should have been shrinking. Instead, Derek's certainty was growing while the evidence supporting it was disappearing. Am I free to leave? Malcolm asked. Derek looked at him. For the first time, the answer did not come immediately. He looked toward the hotel, toward Ethan, toward the body camera, toward Malcolm's sedan, then back at Malcolm. Once I finish documenting this. Malcolm nodded. Then I will wait. No anger. No protest. No attempt to use rank. He simply stood beneath the garage lights while Derek completed the form. Malcolm knew the most important moment had already passed. It was not the detention itself. It was the point when verification had become easier than suspicion, and Derek had chosen suspicion anyway. At 7:12 p.m., Derek Vaughn returned to the precinct believing the encounter was over. Malcolm Hayes had been released after the detention notice was completed, and no arrest had been made. To Derek, that should have been the end of it. He sat at his desk beneath the fluorescent lights and began writing the report in the clean language police paperwork often demanded. Suspicious person call. Subject matched general description. Investigative detention conducted. Identity confirmed. Subject released. The sentences looked orderly on the screen. The actual encounter had not felt nearly as simple. Captain Stephen Brooks walked past, noticed Derek still typing, and stopped. Anything serious? Derek leaned back. Nothing major. Guy outside the hotel kept turning every question into a legal debate. Brooks glanced toward the report. Hotel conference. Yeah. Military legal event. Any violation? Derek shook his head. No arrest. I documented the stop. Brooks nodded toward the monitor. Body camera running? The whole time. Then make sure your report matches it. Derek gave a faint smile. It does. Across town, Malcolm had returned to the conference level, where Major Allison Reed was organizing materials for the next morning. She looked up the moment he entered. You were gone longer than expected. Malcolm set his briefcase on a chair. Local police stop near the garage. Allison's expression sharpened. What happened? Malcolm described the encounter in sequence. No exaggeration. No assumptions about motive. He told her about the broad description, the confirmed vehicle registration, the hotel's offer to provide footage, and Derek's decision to continue the detention anyway. Allison listened carefully. Did he know who you were? He knew my name. You know what I mean. Malcolm looked toward the windows overlooking the city. No, Allison folded her arms. You could have shown him your military credentials. I could have. Why did you not? Malcolm paused. Because if a title is the only thing that makes someone check the facts, then the title is hiding the problem. Allison was quiet for a moment. What do you want done? Preserve the hotel footage. Request the dispatch audio through proper channels. Send a routine preservation request for the body camera recording and written report. Do you want command involved? No. Department leadership? Not unless procedure requires it. Allison studied him. And if Officer Vaughn was justified? Malcolm answered immediately. Then the evidence should protect him. And if he was not? Malcolm picked up a folder from the table. Then the same evidence should protect the next person. Back at the precinct, Brooks opened the identity return attached to Derek's report. The first line looked ordinary. Malcolm Hayes. Valid driver's license. Verified address. Then Brooks noticed the federal and military employment notation linked through authorized records. Colonel Malcolm Hayes. Senior military judicial assignment. Brooks read it twice. He looked toward Derek. Derek. Derek turned around. Brooks motioned him over. Your guy from the hotel. Derek approached the screen. What about him? Brooks pointed to the entry. Derek read the lines slowly. Military judge? Brooks nodded. Senior 1. Derek stared at the screen. The confidence he had carried into the report began to fade. He remembered Malcolm standing under the garage lights, calm while witnesses recorded, asking questions Derek had dismissed as arrogance. He remembered the faint smile. He remembered the words, I will see you in court. Until that moment, Derek had believed Malcolm was trying to sound important. Now he understood something else. Malcolm had known exactly what every question meant, exactly what every camera was preserving, and exactly where a disputed detention could eventually be examined. Brooks looked at Derek. His rank does not decide whether your stop was right. Derek said nothing. Brooks continued. The footage does. The next morning, Captain Stephen Brooks reviewed Derek Vaughn's body camera footage before the precinct became busy. Derek stood beside the desk, arms folded, watching the same encounter he had lived through less than 12 hours earlier. On the screen, Malcolm Hayes appeared calm from the first question to the last. His driver's license was valid. The sedan was registered to him. Dispatch had provided no race, no confirmed vehicle, and no additional detail linking Malcolm to suspicious conduct. Then came the moment Ethan Miller offered. Immediate access to hotel security footage. Brooks paused the recording. Your report says the subject remained evasive. Derek looked at the screen. He kept challenging the detention. Brooks turned toward him. Show me where he was evasive. Derek hesitated. Brooks resumed the footage. Malcolm's voice came through clearly. He asked what description had been provided. He asked whether Derek was requesting consent to search the briefcase. He asked what fact justified continuing the detention after vehicle ownership was confirmed. Each question sounded calmer on playback than Derek remembered. That bothered him. Memory had preserved Malcolm as argumentative because that was how Derek had felt in the moment. The camera preserved something else. He knew how to push without raising his voice, Derek said. Brooks looked at him. Knowing the law is not obstruction. Derek said nothing. Across town, Major Allison Reed received confirmation that the hotel had preserved 3 separate camera angles. Ethan had submitted a written statement describing exactly when he offered Derek access to the footage. The dispatch audio was also being retained. Allison placed the documents in front of Malcolm. Everything is preserved. Malcolm scanned the list. Good. The department knows your position now. I assumed they would. Allison studied him. Still no command call? No request for discipline. No, she leaned back. Most people in your position would want something immediate. Malcolm looked at her. Immediate satisfaction and fair process are not the same thing. Allison nodded toward the papers. What if the department closes it internally? Malcolm considered the question. Then we use the next lawful avenue available. Nothing more. By 10:15 a.m., a formal preservation request had reached Brooks through counsel, asking the department to retain the body camera footage, dispatch recording, written report, and communications connected to the detention. It accused no one. It demanded no punishment. Brooks read it twice before handing it to Derek. This is clean. Derek frowned. Clean. No pressure. No rank. No threat. Just preservation. Derek looked toward Malcolm's name on the document. So he is building a case. Brooks shook his head. He is preserving the record. Whether there is a case depends on what the record shows. Derek stared at the page. The distinction felt small until he remembered Malcolm saying almost the same thing under the garage lights. Facts first. Authority second. Brooks reopened the body camera footage and advanced to the final minutes. Derek's own voice came through the speakers. You can explain it to a judge. Then Malcolm's calm reply followed. That is exactly what I plan to do. Derek looked away. Brooks paused the video. You thought he was threatening you. I thought he was being arrogant. And now? Derek did not answer immediately. Outside the office, telephones rang and officers moved through the morning shift. Inside, the room felt unusually still. Derek finally looked back at the frozen image of Malcolm standing beside the sedan. Now I think he was warning me to make sure I could explain what I was doing. Brooks nodded once. Then start there. Derek looked at his written report again. For the first time, discovering Malcolm was a military judge no longer felt like the worst part of the situation. The worst realization was that Malcolm's rank had changed almost nothing about the evidence, and that meant Derek would eventually have to defend his decisions without hiding behind the importance of the man he had detained. 3 weeks later, Derek Vaughn entered the county courthouse with the same report he had written the night of the detention tucked inside a folder under his arm. He had read it so many times that the language felt almost automatic. Suspicious person call. General description. Investigative detention. Subject argumentative. Identity confirmed. Released without arrest. On paper, the sequence looked clean. In the courtroom, it did not stay clean for long. Judge Caroline Mercer took the bench just after 9 in the morning and explained that the hearing would focus on whether the continued detention remained supported after the available facts changed. Malcolm Hayes sat at the opposite table in a dark civilian suit. No uniform. No rank insignia. No military entourage. Major Allison Reed sat behind him with counsel, but Malcolm had insisted from the beginning that his position not become the center of the case. Derek looked at him once. Malcolm did not look back. The first evidence played was the dispatch audio. The caller described a man near parked vehicles, wearing dark clothing and carrying a bag. No race. No specific age. No confirmed vehicle. No report of entry into any car. Then came the hotel security footage. The screen showed Malcolm leaving the conference area, walking directly toward his sedan, placing his briefcase on the trunk, and checking his telephone. He never approached another vehicle. Ethan Miller's statement confirmed that hotel security had offered Derek the footage while the detention was still ongoing. Judge Mercer turned toward Derek. Officer Vaughn, when the hotel offered immediate video verification, why did you decline? Derek leaned toward the microphone. I believed I had enough information to continue clarifying the situation. What information had changed in your favor by that point? Derek hesitated. His behavior. What behavior? The courtroom became very quiet. Derek looked toward his report. He remained argumentative. The judge nodded toward the monitor. Let us look at that. The body camera footage played. Malcolm's voice filled the room. Calm. Precise. He asked for the description. He asked whether Derek was seeking consent to search the briefcase. He asked what fact justified continuing after the vehicle registration was confirmed. Then the radio call played back, verifying ownership and providing no new suspicious detail. Judge Mercer paused the footage. Officer Vaughn, where is the argument? Derek looked at the frozen image of Malcolm standing beside the sedan. He kept questioning the detention. Questioning the legal basis is not the same as refusing to comply. Derek said nothing. The video resumed. Ethan offered footage again. Derek declined. Malcolm asked whether he was free to leave. Derek continued the detention long enough to complete additional documentation. Finally came the line Derek had replayed in his head for weeks. You can explain it to a judge. Malcolm's reply followed. That is exactly what I plan to do. Judge Mercer stopped the recording and turned toward Malcolm. Mr. Hayes, did you identify yourself as a military judge during the encounter? No, Your Honor. Why not? Malcolm looked toward Derek for the first time. Because my title should not have been necessary for the facts to matter. No one spoke. Derek had entered the courtroom believing the hearing would become a contest between a police officer and a powerful military judge. Instead, Malcolm's rank had almost disappeared from the case. The dispatch audio mattered. The cameras mattered. The registration check mattered. The written report mattered. The facts mattered. Judge Mercer closed the evidence file in front of her. This court is not deciding whether Mr. Hayes was important. It is deciding whether the detention remained justified after the available information no longer supported the original suspicion. Derek lowered his eyes to the report he once believed would define the encounter. For the first time, he understood that court was not a place where authority automatically became truth. It was a place where authority had to explain itself. Judge Caroline Mercer returned to the courtroom after a short recess and took her seat without ceremony. Derek Vaughn sat beside department counsel, his report closed in front of him. Malcolm Hayes remained at the opposite table, composed, hands resting loosely beside a thin folder. No one spoke as Judge Mercer reviewed the findings. The initial inquiry was supported by the information available when Officer Vaughn arrived. She began. But an investigative detention must be reassessed as new facts develop. Derek looked up. Judge Mercer continued carefully. Malcolm's identification had been verified. The sedan belonged to him. Dispatch provided no additional description connecting him to criminal conduct. Hotel security offered immediate footage showing his movements. Yet the detention continued. The court finds that the continued detention exceeded what the remaining facts reasonably supported. The words landed without drama. No raised voices. No celebration. Just a conclusion built from the same evidence Derek had once believed would protect him. Judge Mercer ordered the record transmitted through the appropriate process for departmental administrative review. Malcolm did not smile. He simply nodded when the judge finished. Outside the courtroom, Captain Stephen Brooks waited near the hallway windows. When Derek emerged, Brooks handed him a notice. You are being reassigned from field duty while Internal Affairs completes its review. Derek read the page. So one bad decision ends everything? Brooks shook his head. Nobody said that. The review decides what happens next. Derek looked down the hallway and saw Malcolm walking toward the elevators with Major Allison Reed. Pride told him to keep walking. Something else stopped him. Colonel Hayes. Malcolm turned. Derek approached, but stayed several feet away. You knew this was where it would end. Malcolm shook his head. No, you are a judge. Derek glanced toward the courtroom doors. You knew what they would decide. I knew what the record showed, Malcolm said. That is not the same thing. Derek was quiet for a moment. When you said you would see me in court, I thought you were threatening me. Malcolm's expression softened slightly. Court was never where I planned to use my rank against you. Derek looked at him. Malcolm continued. It was where your certainty would finally have to explain itself. The words carried no anger. That made them harder to dismiss. You think I am racist, Derek said. Malcolm did not answer immediately. I think you saw me, accepted a weak description, and kept searching for reasons to justify a decision after the facts started pointing the other way. The review will decide what that pattern means. Derek lowered his eyes. Malcolm could have demanded punishment. He could have called senior commanders, embarrassed the department, or treated Derek's career as repayment for the humiliation outside the hotel. He did none of those things. If you remember anything from that night, Malcolm said, remember that authority does not become weaker when it questions itself. It becomes trustworthy. Weeks later, the departmental review resulted in formal discipline, additional training on investigative detention and bias awareness, and renewed examination of several earlier complaints involving similar stops. Some complaints were substantiated. Others were not. Each one was judged separately. Malcolm returned to his military courtroom and never mentioned Derek from the bench. Derek eventually returned to duty under closer supervision, carrying something different with him. He still trusted experience. He still understood that officers sometimes had to make quick decisions with incomplete information. But he no longer treated instinct as proof. On the night they met, Derek believed power meant being the person who could stop someone and demand answers. Malcolm understood the harder truth. Real authority begins when the person asking the questions is willing to answer for them too.